Hello, this is Deborah Clay, author and podcaster, and this is Castaway Books. Each week I invite a guest to tell me about the books that have inspired their life and influenced their writing. This week's guest is Seána Tinley. Hello, I am delighted to welcome my guest today, Seána Tinley, who you can see has physically joined me on my island. All we need is a little bar between us with our cocktails and we shall be away.
It's just lovely to be with you on this island, Deborah, and I think we're going to have a lovely day here in the sunshine with the waves behind us.
We certainly will, especially now I know all the questions I want to ask you. Now I know what your books are. It's very excited to talk to you. So Seána Tinley is an award-winning Irish author. She writes saga historical romance with a strong emphasis on women's social history. Her novel, The Irish Midwife, a saga like Call the Midwife but set in 1930s Ireland, was published in September. Congratulations. Seána also writes Regency romance as Catherine Tinley. So welcome, Seána.
Thank you so much, Deborah. It's lovely to be here.
We're going to go straight in with book one.
So my book one is The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. I guess a lot of people choose it. It is such a great book. And, you know, I've listed it, but I really mean the whole series. So that was, I was in primary school when I started reading those. And those were the books that turned me into a reader, into a voracious reader. You know, I just loved everything about it. The fact that the girls got to have adventures just as much as the boys. The fact that it was actually, I discovered later, it was set. His idea of Narnia was my own part of the world, County Down, and specifically the village of Rostrevor, which is my mum's home village. There's this beautiful meadow there, with oak trees dotted around it, and it's just like the illustrations for Narnia. So that was lovely as well. But I think also the magic of it, the contrast between the drab real world and then this wonderful land where animals could talk and magical things could happen. So I think, it had everything that child me needed at that time.
How old would you have been when you were enjoying those books?
I think maybe 8 or 9. And I would have read them, the whole way through primary school, but I read them over and over again, and I still do. I still go back and read those occasionally. And I know the stories really well now. And, certain passages are entirely familiar to me. I've read it so many times. But the whole lot, I just absolutely adored it. And, he used to talk about the Mourne Mountains and how those were his inspiration as well, and how he used to imagine a group of dwarfs coming over the next bridge, and then Cair Paravel, where the land swept down to the sea, which is what happens in Rostrevor, which is where I used to go every summer to my grandmother's on holiday. And so I could vividly picture it even before I knew that the books were based on my own area.
There was a recognition there in your heart.
But I think so.
But life wasn't as easy for you, though. Tell me about your life then.
Yeah, so I grew up in County Down, and at that time the Troubles would have been in full flow. I grew up on a nationalist council estate in what now would be described as challenging circumstances. So 2 parents and 6 children in a small council house. We never lacked love, but unemployment was through the roof. There used to actually be a joke in our estate that there was a man over the road who had a job. There was, none of the men had work. And, we didn't know that we were poor though, because everybody was the same. Everybody lived in the same circumstances. But I really needed the escapism of books like that. I mean, I got caught in crossfire one time. A child was killed at the top of my street. I had soldiers in my garden every day, and there was, rioting and, teenage boys throwing stones and petrol bombs all the time. And it was just normal to me. It's only as an adult that I realized it wasn't actually a normal life,
terrifying. But you grew up, so that was all you knew at that age.
Yeah, yeah, it was completely normal. And years later, my sister and I talked about the fact that these nuns used to come on a Saturday to our community centre to like sing songs and play games with us, and they always had sweets and stuff, and they were lovely. And years later, we realized they were coming to, to be kind to the poor,
Oh,
and we were the poor. We didn't know we were poor. Our whole world was that estate and the things that were happening there. And we were well drilled. My mom had us well drilled. If there was ever any trouble, you went straight home. If you couldn't get home, you went into somebody else's house. All the mummies would take the children in if something was kicking off. So you always knew. I mean, normally there were like jeeps and helicopters and stuff, but if the tanks arrived, then you knew that it was really serious. I mean, for goodness sake, tanks on an
mm,
urban street
mm.
in Western Europe. Like this
Right.
was
Yeah.
this was actually crazy.
Mm,
And it seems so strange to me now that that was my childhood, you
mm,
know.
mm,
Um, and even the crossfire incident, it was, an exchange of fire between British soldiers and an IRA sniper. And I was standing there in the middle of it, wondering what was going on and why everyone was shouting. And this lady up the street came out of her house and shouted at me to get down. And I remember just standing there going, why is she saying that?
mm,
I'm just literally, I'm so lucky that I wasn't hit
mm,
because I was just
mm,
standing in the middle of all of this.
mm,
And there was a bomb outside my school one time, and it was just normal. It
mm,
was just normal, and we took it as normal. And years later, when I went off to uni, I went to Trinity College in Dublin. I
mm,
was really lucky. I worked hard in school, and I got good A level results. And I'm the first one, as many of us our generation are, the first one to get to university. And I remember being down there in my first few weeks, and there was a security guard at the entrance to Cleary's, which is a big department store.
mm,
Without thinking, I opened up my bag to show it to him, and he laughed at me. He was like, "Oh, we don't do that down here, love." And I was like, "Oh, scundered, scundered." But it was just
mm,
reflexive. I
mm,
saw him there. I just assumed I had to show him what was in my bag because that was the norm for me. Everywhere we went, there was searches. Your bag got searched. You sometimes got body searched. Soldiers would get onto the school bus, all of that stuff. Um, but it was only when I lived in Dublin for a while that I realized that here was an entire world where there was none of that,
mm,
you
mm,
know?
mm.
But yeah, the Narnia series sums up my childhood reading. I read lots of other stuff. That was what got me on the path.
Where did you
But it
read?
was Narnia.
Where on earth did you read with a family with six children?
So
Library?
I used to read. I know. I was quite good at tuning the world out.
Mm,
Um, and I used to read in school. So we had school library. And we also were members of our town library.
mm,
And mommy really encouraged us to read. So, we always had books in the house and around the house. And if I was reading, she would just encourage me to go up and find a quiet place upstairs.
mm,
Because normally we weren't allowed upstairs during the day. We had to go and play outside. This house was really small and she couldn't have us under her feet. So unless the weather was really bad, we were outside playing. But if the weather was bad, then she would have to just kind of manage us, since there were six of us. I was the eldest, so I had to do a lot of caring for the younger ones as well.
mm.
Um, but you can find time to read if you're one of those children, you know?
Well, I'm getting an idea of how you managed to pack so much into your life. You had a good grounding and a stoic mother.
She was
let's
great.
move,
She was great.
let's move on to the second book because I could talk all day, but we'll be able to go back as we go through the books. Your next book was.
So my next book, I've chosen Savage Surrender by Charlotte Lamb, not for that particular book, but just to symbolize my Mills and Boon era.
Mm,
Okay. So I went to a Catholic girls' grammar school and was taught by lots of nuns, with all of those very strict teachings about relationships and sex and, nothing happening outside marriage. But of course, we all discovered Mills and Boon, and the other books that were around at the time. Uh, my mum used to borrow Mills and Boons, and I used to sneak them out of the bag at the bottom of her wardrobe. I could read one in 2.5 hours
mm,
while she, because I would go to bed first. get this read and put it back in her bag, and she was none the wiser. So,
Naughty girl.
yeah, I read hundreds of them,
Mm,
hundreds of them. So there was everything, strong heroines, these strong women, and these men who actually earned their love
mm,
and were fit for them,
mm,
the heroes who adored them. And there was everything. There was the romance, beautiful romance, sex. There was stuff
mm,
about sex. What? Even the stuff about exotic locations. I loved that, all the Greek books and the French books and the Italian books. Um, Again, when I think about it now, it was basically a new form of escapism. And I
mm,
was so ready for it, you
mm.
know?
And how do you think Mills and Boon has changed over time? Because I remember reading Mills and Boon. It was as you say, it was our first education about romance and that naughty word sex. Because you probably read them like me when you were about 13 and still finding out about these things. So how?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they haven't changed fundamentally in that they still have the same core elements. The strong heroine, the hero who deserves her, sex in some of the books, exotic locations in some of the books. I think all of us have learned over the years to be careful about certain things. Like, nowadays, Mills and Boon books are really clear about consent, for example,
Mm,
where some of that was quite dubious back in the day.
mm,
So I think there's been some subtle ways in which they've changed, but the quality of writing has always been really good.
mm.
And it was such an honor for me to be picked up by them years later, and so hard to get in with them,
Let's just add here because our viewers may not all realise that one of your first books you were published by Mills and Boon, weren't you?
Yes. So my first ever book was picked up by Mills and Boon. It was a Regency romance, and it was inspired when I was watching the BBC Pride and Prejudice with Colin Firth.
Mm-hmm.
They re-showed it a number of years later, and I got to thinking about women's roles back then, and there was a what if came into my head, as it always does, and that I started to write that what if, and it became my first book.
Tell us what was the what
Um,
if? What if? Tell
so
us.
the what if was a kind of Cinderella style situation where boy meets girl, boy likes girl, boy needs money, and everything's going well, right? Because he's got this estate that's falling apart, and he has to be sensible and marry an heiress who can bring some money in to save everybody. But then her family loses all its money. Her father dies, Cinderella style, and there's no money. They discover. What's he then going to do? That's his dilemma. Is he going to continue with this woman that he was developing an interest in, or is he going to drop her? And what are her nasty relatives going to do when they realize that she's not rich anymore? So it was a Cinderella story, and it was called Waltzing with the Earl. And that was my first ever published book. And it actually won an award as well in America, a Rita Award, which was just amazing. So I've
Fantastic.
written like 12 or 13 of those since, all for
Mm,
Mills and Boone. They just keep giving me
wow,
new contracts. So it's brilliant.
amazing.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic. The theme of strong women has come up a lot. Is that something you feel strongly about? I know your mother must have been incredible to have held that family together through difficult times, and I suspect you were a very strong woman too. So, what is it about these strong female roles that interests you?
Yeah, you've nailed it there. I think in working class communities, it's often the matriarch. It's often that strong woman who holds it together for everyone. My dad's great as well, but it's my mother who was that central force in our lives. She was always there. She was so on it. Some of the other mums were quite lax and didn't really mind too much when where the children were when they came back. Now we were allowed to roam, but she always made sure we were in at tea time. She didn't let us out in the evenings. I mean, these were difficult times as well. And she, in order for her to do that with six children, she had to be switched on 24/7.
Mm,
And she was. She never let up. She just kept that going, managed everything, managed the household, managed the meager income. Um, was really loving and really caring and looked after us all and, raised six children in really difficult circumstances. So my whole life has been shaped by that.
mm,
And as an adult, in my day jobs, in my campaigning work, I've always been focused on women's issues.
Mm.
When I had my first child, I suddenly got a real passion for campaigning about maternity services and better support for pregnant women, women in labour, new parents, breastfeeding support, all that whole piece.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really important to me for years. But yeah, strong women is absolutely a theme. And if I was asked to summarize what links all my books, that's what it is. The Regencies and now these sagas, these 1930s sagas, they're always focused around a strong woman maybe facing adversity, but overcoming that adversity.
Mm. A theme that runs through your life, your reading, and your writing.
Yes, absolutely. Uh-huh.
Let's go on to your third book.
Okay. So my third book is by Sherry S. Tepper, who is a sci-fi writer. And in the end, I picked the Marianne trilogy, but it could just as easily have been Ginny and Fitzseer or The Gate to Women's Country, which has these strong women characters in it as well. And so as a young adult, I went through a phase of reading all the literary classics, as you do, right? I got into crime fiction for a while, first the Agatha Christie's, then 1940s Gumshoes, Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, read all the Sherlock Holmes, Wilkie Collins, and then kind of later on got into the darkness of Patricia Highsmith's books. So I kind of went through a whole phase of that. But then I discovered Sherry S. Tepper, and her books really chimed with me. I loved the feminist themes, the exploration of other worlds and other societies, other ways of being, and her quirkiness. She was really quirky. I didn't agree with all of her stuff, but even that is interesting. It's intellectually stimulating to go, yeah, 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 I see what she's doing there. I don't like this bit. I agree with that bit. And, it makes you think.
Mm.
So Marianne Trilogy was one of my favorites, but Gate to Women's Country was really interesting. It's this post-apocalyptic society where the women live inside a walled city and the men are divided into soldiers and servants. And the soldiers live outside the gates and only get access to the women at festival time. And the servants are the perceived to be the weaker men, and they're allowed to be servants inside the city. And what she does is she sets up a whole society, and then towards the end of the book, you get to see that it actually is completely different. All your assumptions were wrong, and there was other stuff going on beneath the surface about the relationships between the men and the women and all of that. So it was really a fascinating book. Um, but she was my gateway into female fantasy and sci-fi. Now,
Mm.
I had loved A Wrinkle in Time when I was a kid. Madeleine L'Engle, loved that. But at this point, I started reading Ursula Le Guin, Anne McCaffrey's Dragonflight, Chronicles of Pern, those books. And from there, I found my new favorite genre, which was like high fantasy. So David Eddings, Raymond E. Feist, Johnny Wirtz, all of those writers. So there is a theme as well. There's the strong women theme, but there's also that escape from reality theme.
Mm. Mm.
And high fantasy really echoed back to Narnia.
Mm.
Whether it was a sci-fi setting or a magical medieval world, there was that sense of safely exploring some human questions
Mm.
through a very different world, one that wasn't too realistic. I've never been able to be comfortable reading gritty books about the real world because I lived that and it's not
Mm.
nice and I don't want to be reminded of it.
Absolutely
So
get
I
that.
need to I find a safe way of exploring some of the bigger issues through sci-fi, fantasy, some of those other genres where
Mm.
I can manage the emotions better.
Mm. Mm. Interesting.
Yeah.
What was happening in in your life at that time? I mean, by then would you have gone to university or moved on from there?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I went to Trinity College in Dublin, which was amazing.
Mm.
If you've watched Normal People,
Hmm.
I was like the Connell character. So I was the working class person who finds himself in this what ho, surrounded by Trinity types who'd all been to private school and played rugby and all that crack. And I was like, here, I'm a wee girl from Derrybeg. What is actually going on here? So that was quite disconcerting. And I was training as a speech and language therapist, which was great. But yeah, so that whole period spans kind of university, a few different romantic relationships, having your heart broken, getting over it, starting again with somebody else. And then I guess the the few years afterwards when I had qualified and I worked in Belfast for a few years as a speech and language therapist, I was still reading all that stuff then.
Mm.
So, a time of change, that bit in your early 20s, well, from 18 right up to mid 20s, when you're kind of, really settling into who you are.
Mm. Mm.
But I was still a voracious reader,
Did
and
you?
a quick reader.
It was obviously a culture shock going to Dublin with very different people. Did you find you fitted in easily, or did you feel a bit excluded? I mean, how was it changing into that culture and feeling that you fitted and belonged?
Yeah, it was definitely hard. It was definitely hard. Financially, I was okay because Northern grants at that time were better. We got grants, not loans back then, and Northern grants were actually better than Southern grants.
Mm.
So I actually had more cash than some of the ordinary girls. And then there were the rich girls in my course, and there was rich lads who'd been to private school and all of that. And it was they just I couldn't connect. I didn't understand their world at all.
Mm.
I had no point of reference to enter into their world.
Mm.
Perfectly nice, and I got on well with them. But my best friends were ones from kind of more ordinary backgrounds, which I think is probably significant that was where I felt more comfortable with young women who had at least ordinary, maybe not the level of challenge that I'd had, but they'd had ordinary upbringings without the private school bit and, holidays abroad and all of that, because we'd never had any of that. So
Have you stayed
it
in
was
touch?
challenging. And you know what? Yeah, sorry.
Yes, have you stayed in touch with any of them?
Yes, we meet up every year. We met up 2 weeks ago in Dublin, seven of us,
Lovely,
all the speech and language therapists, and it's so lovely to see them all. Some of us shared a house as well for a while, so we really know each other well. And yeah, it's just so lovely to still have them in my life, those girls. They're
fantastic,
great. Yeah,
fantastic. Can't beat women friends. They're the best.
totally.
So let's go on to your fourth book.
Okay, so sticking with the fantasy theme, this is my favorite fantasy series ever. Okay, so it's the Empire Trilogy by Raymond E. Feist and Johnny Wirtz writing together, which I love because you have the male and the female perspective coming in the writing. So book one is Daughter of the Empire, and then there's Servant of the Empire, Daughter of the Empire, Mistress of the Empire, whatever the way around it is. Um, it follows the main female character, Mara, from uncertain teenager right through to kick-ass leader. Um, and there's this wonderful world of politics and intrigue and magic that gets slowly revealed over the course of three books. I've read it multiple times and I never, ever get tired of it.
Wow.
It's fantastic writing.
I
Yeah,
notice
love
a
it.
theme here. You've sneaked in all of your books, I think, have been trilogies or series so far. So
Sorry, because you
sneaky.
get more into it. You get more into it, one-off books, you're barely in the world before the book's over, especially if you're a fast reader like me.
Mm,
For me to really get that depth, it does tend to be a series,
mm.
you
So
know.
you're just taking a lot more to the island. Your raft is going to sink.
Sorry, but you can get them in bound volumes.
You're allowed. It's all
Good. Cheating.
right. So, what happened after you left university? You went back to Belfast, you said, to work as a speech and language therapist. Hmm.
I did. So I did that for 3 years. And while I was there, I did a postgraduate qualification teaching English to speakers of other languages because, still with this exotic idea of work living in another country. And then I got a job teaching English in Germany, in Munich, beautiful city. So I went there. That's where I met my husband. He was working in the same language school. He's an English lad. And we got married a couple of years later. We moved back to England. I had my three children there, far away from home and family, which was really hard because I'm so family oriented. So NCT, the National Childbirth Trust, was my lifeline. That's where I got my mum friends, and that's also, as I mentioned, that's when became really passionate about the issues. So I started volunteering with them and ended up volunteering with them for like 20 years, long past the childbearing stage, and was on their board as a trustee, chair of the board, UK president,
Oh,
passionate campaigner for improvements in maternity services, and that's still important to me to this day, you
And
know?
that has influenced the maternity services, has influenced your recent book, The Irish Midwife, because you know so much about maternity services, which we'll get
Yeah.
to in a moment because I want to know a bit more about that. But first of all, I was just going to say to you what I didn't say at the beginning, which is very important. Many listeners will know you by another name, your other name, which is Seána Talbot. And Seána is chair of the Romantic Novelists Association. So you've gone through many roles, taking on big roles, president, chair, trustee of big organisations. What is it about volunteering that attracts you? And how on earth do you find the time when you're working full time and writing all these books? How do you do it?
You know, people always ask me that, and I don't really know why other people can't. It just happens. I couldn't have done it when my children were small, to be fair. But now they're well up. So, I I've moved on to kind of senior management roles in the health service
Mm-hmm.
and recently jumped across to the charity sector. So I'm a country director for a major charity, chair of the RNA. I've been on lots of boards over the years, but you're right, volunteering is a thread. And that goes right back to my childhood in that estate
Mm-hmm.
because community development, we didn't know that that was the name for it, but that's what we were doing. That's what I saw, especially the women doing back then. So the women would help each other, they would fundraise. The community built a community centre themselves called the Hut. We called it the Hut, but it was actually a substantial building with a stage at one end, a kitchen at the other end, a toilet block, a big hall. And we had all sorts of concerts in there where people from the estate would get up and perform Irish style. Um, and then we ended up having a festival every year, the Derrybeg Festival, with races and best garden competitions and, social evenings and all sorts of bizarre things. There was a pram race where the men used to dress as women and babies, and one had to get in the pram dressed as a baby, and the other had to push it, and it was a race.
I
Like,
remember them.
yeah, bizarre stuff. But it was so good. And there was such a tight sense of community, and it would not have happened without volunteering. So I grew up with that ethos, and I've always been volunteering. So in secondary school, I helped with like St. Vincent de Paul, which was a local group that supported older people and families with young children who hadn't got much money. And we would do fundraisers and stuff and Christmas parties. And, it just has always been part of my life. And I think that it keeps your mental health in balance, helping others, appreciating what you have. It helps you focus on that gratitude.
Mm.
Um, my situation is very comfortable. All of us, all my siblings and my parents ended up, financially and socially comfortable, but we'll never forget those really hard times that we had before. So volunteering is part of who I am. And obviously when I entered the writing world, it didn't take long. One of my friends who um, was chair of NCT when I was vice chair is a management consultant. And when the RNA was going through a period where they needed an external consultant to do a review, they did a call out and they said, does anybody know a good management consultant? So I recommended Beryl. And
Mhm.
Beryl did the review. We turned the RNA around and she said to me, they really could do with someone on their board who knows a bit about governance and you know a bit about governance. Would you think about going on their board? And I ended up 2 years later becoming chair. So that's that story. Oh,
Brilliant.
and you and I have both been on the board together, and there are people who step up when there's a call out arrives when they go, oh, that sounds a bit like me. Maybe I should do that.
Yeah. Well, you're amazing. We're getting short on time, but we will go to your fifth book.
Okay, so my fifth book is Frederica by Georgette Hare. It is not a series. Okay,
Yay!
so it's a one-off, but I had to really choose. I always continued to read romance as well as fantasy, and I enjoyed mashups like time slip and speculative romance, but I'd also developed a real fondness for Regency romance, and I discovered the wonderful Georgette Hare. So I wished she had written hundreds of Regency and Georgian books, and it was with that in mind that I first had a go at writing a book myself. I've read all of her Regencies and all of her Georgians so many times that I actually have to force myself to put them away and leave at least a year in between because I just remember it too much and I lose the freshness. So, um, I just love her books. I really do.
So, do you say romance is your favourite genre? You've said all lots
I
of
would say
others.
so. Yeah, there's still fantasy. I still like reading fantasy as well, but it has to be romance now. You
Mm.
know, whether it's reading or even, the Hallmark Christmas movies. I'm a sucker for a man in a plaid shirt.
And what about this new genre, romantasy, which is a mixture between romance and fantasy? Does that appeal to you?
I actually haven't read that many of them yet, but I don't have time. Okay. So what has changed in my life since I started writing is that I get through fewer books reading now because it seems to take up the same part of my brain.
Mm,
Um, so I do intend to read more romantasy. I think I could quite enjoy it, but I have to be sure that it's not too dark,
mm,
which sounds strange because parts of the Empire trilogy are really dark. You know, there's an assassin that does awful things, and there's darkness in it. But you just hang on to your favorite characters and hope they make it through.
mm.
And if they do, then that's a good book. And if they don't, then I'll throw it across the room. You know?
Yeah. Well, your
Yeah.
your book, The Irish Midwife, came out last month. So people can find a link on the show notes so they can read that. Sounds wonderful. And for fans of Call the Midwife, it'll be great. And also with your background knowledge about maternity services and the research you've done into how things have changed and the role of women, it makes for great reading. So congratulations on that. I've got one last question to ask you, and that is, what will you take as your luxury item to the island?
So I know most writers want writing materials, and that would probably, if I really had to choose only one, that would probably be it. But ideally, I would love to bring a musical instrument because it's one thing that I have never had the time to do. I've kind of toyed a bit with the tin whistle, went to a few classes, did a bit of violin in primary school, but we all did recorder. But I would love to play a musical instrument properly. And, a bit like Jean-Luc Picard in one particular episode of Star Trek, where he lives a whole life and then, resets to his earlier age, he gets to learn to play a musical instrument in that, and that's always stayed with me, and I would love to do that.
Which instrument would it be?
It doesn't even matter. Guitar, piano, tin whistle, banjo. It
Anything.
doesn't matter. I would play any of them.
And you probably could if you set your mind to it. Anyone. It's been so wonderful talking to you, Seána. Thank you for coming to my island and making it bigger by having a double screen. It's wonderful. Thank you.
It's been lovely. It's really lovely. Thank you for inviting me. And I think genuinely those waves behind us and the breeze and the trees and everything, I think there's something really lovely about how you've set this up. So thank you so much. I've loved it.
Thank you. Bye bye.